So in this section, we will be going over how to properly correct your dog. Corrections are incredibly important in your dog's training because corrections are how you are going to eliminate or stop any unwanted behaviors. So whether that unwanted behavior is jumping, barking at another dog, play biting, getting on the couch, or getting off of place without permission, you need to punish those behaviors or correct those behaviors in order for your dog to stop them. So in our system, corrections apply both positive punishment and negative reinforcement. Positive punishment simply means that you are applying a physical consequence, such as with the e-collar or with a leash, to diminish the frequency that your dog does a behavior. That's all punishment means. Punishment should decrease the frequency that a dog does an unwanted behavior. So other than positive punishment, you will also be using negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is where we take away something unwanted. So we remove something unwanted, something that the dog doesn't like, in order to reward the dog for listening to us. So when we correct dogs, we apply both positive punishment and negative reinforcement. And this will make sense once we demonstrate how to correct your dog with a leash or with the e-collar. So within our system, the golden rule of a correction is that it should not have any negative consequences to it. And that's incredibly important because correction is a widely used term in dog training. And just because we correct a dog in a certain way doesn't mean that the dog trainer down the street is going to use that same method. So with us at Canine Karma Training, a correction should not have any negative consequences to it. So for example, if your dog were to jump up on you and you were to violently push them off of you, you might stop the jumping, so that correction worked, but now when you go to pet your dog, they might cower away. I would consider that a negative consequence, and your correction should not have any negative consequences. The way that we derive this golden rule for our method of corrections is because we observed how dogs correct each other in a proper social setting. So when dogs correct each other, they quickly, and I'm sure you've seen it before, they'll take their mouth and they'll quickly bite, grab, or squeeze another dog in their neck or behind their neck in order to tell the dog, I don't like that. Stop biting my ear. Stop trying to take my toy. Just leave me alone. You'll usually see this with moms who correct young puppies or with a properly socialized older dog, maybe correcting a younger dog who's annoying them. So when dogs correct each other, there's no personal feelings involved. No feelings are hurt. And what's also important is that the other dog is not injured. If you see a correction happen, but there is a puncture wound or there is blood or there is, medical attention needed, that was not a correction. That was absolutely an attack and that was not appropriate. But when dogs correct each other, especially a mom correcting a really young, delicate puppy, she's using her mouth. And to us, it might look a little violent because when dogs bite each other, it's a little scary, but that dog knows exactly what they're doing. Your dog has incredible control over their mouth. So that pit bull that can break someone's arm by biting them can also take a grape and toss it around the room without breaking, the fruit skin. They have incredible control over their mouth. So when they are correcting each other, they know they are not biting hard enough to actually hurt the dog. But the corrections are always done physically, and that's incredibly important. Dogs do not have a verbal language, so they might warn each other with a growl or with a bark, but if they really want to correct the other dog and stop that dog's unwanted behavior, they are going to bite them. They're going to use their mouth. There has to be a physical component to the correction, and that's why we need to use training tools such as a leash or an e-collar. Now, going back to our golden rule of a correction, there are supposed to be no negative consequences to it. So we have behind the golden rule, 2 rules that we follow when we correct dogs. And the first one, which is very easy, is that it's not supposed to hurt. So when we are correcting a dog within our system here at Canine Karma Training, we're not using any tools or collars or any methods that hurt. You should not need to inflict pain to your dog to get them to listen to you. You should not need to hurt your dog in order to get them to stop an unwanted behavior. If you do hurt your dog, it is incredibly counterproductive to building this incredible relationship that we teach you about. If you want to have a strong relationship with your dog where they trust you and they listen to you and they just think you're the greatest person or thing in this world, you cannot also hurt them. It just doesn't work. So here with us, we do not hurt your dog. We do not use any tool that hurts your dog. So that's the first really important rule to remember. The second, which is a little bit harder for our clients to remember, is that a correction is not supposed to be emotional. So again, going back to observing how dogs correct each other, there's no emotion behind that. That mother is not incredibly frustrated and taking out her anger on her puppy and then holding a grudge afterwards. Just a very cut and dry, stop doing that, I don't like it. So when you correct your dog, you need to be firm. You need to be consistent. You don't want to baby them. You don't want to say no. You do want a firm, mean it, no. But you don't want to yell. You should not have anger or frustration behind your marker or behind your corrections. If you are taking out your frustration or your anger on the dog is going to feel that. They are going to feel like you are attacking them. You are going to make them apprehensive of you. And again, you are going to add lots of conflict to your relationship. Because especially if you have an insecure dog who you need them to follow you and trust you through these scary situations, but you also scare them from time to time, that is not super conducive to building this incredible relationship with them. So if you follow the 2 rules where it's not supposed to hurt, it's not supposed to be emotional, your corrections will not have negative consequences. So the first method of correcting your dog that I want to explain is using a leash. When we correct our dogs with a leash, we always mean attached to a prong collar. Now, your dog will be going home with a properly fit prong collar, but I do want to explain why we use it, how we use it, and how it works. Now, we only use the brand Hermsprenger prong collars. It's a German-made brand. They were the inventor of the collars, and this is not the same thing that you would find at a Petco or a PetSmart. Those are generic. They feel completely different. They hurt. They do not correct your dog properly. So you will only be using this brand. And again, your dog will be going home with one. This is a larger size. Your dog might be going home with a smaller size if they are a smaller dog. So the reason that we use this brand and this brand only is one, the prongs are made of polished stainless steel. So the generic prong collars that you find at the pet store have cut, unfinished ends. And that's oftentimes why you'll see rubber caps put on the ends of them to prevent the dog from being scratched. This cannot scratch your dog. This cannot make them bleed. This cannot poke or stab your dog in any way. The pressure is properly distributed amongst the collar. So you cannot hurt or injure your dog with this specific prong collar if it's fit properly, which yours will be. So other than it being polished stainless steel on the ends, the prong collar from Hermsprenger has this metal plate in the middle. And that is significant because it allows the prongs to switch directions. So you'll see the prongs go up this way, they meet the plate in the middle, and they go up this way. In a generic prong collar, all of the links are a long interconnecting chain, similar to a watch band, so that when you pop the leash and when a generic prong collar corrects your dog, it sort of has a torquing or twisting motion, which is not desirable. That's not what you want. This metal plate allows for the prongs to change direction, and it was designed this way purposefully to simulate a dog's mouth. So as you'll see, this looks like a dog's mouth. This is the hinge of their jaw. This is the opening of their jaw. So this prong collar, this training collar, goes on your dog's neck and bites and grabs and squeezes every time you pop the leash to simulate the way that a dog corrects another dog. So when we observe the way that dogs correct each other in a social setting, again, going back to my earlier explanation, they use their mouth and they bite the other dog's neck. This feels and looks like a dog's mouth on your dog's neck, and every time you pop the leash, the collar squeezes. Again, this collar does not stab or poke or pinch. It squeezes evenly around your dog's neck to most accurately simulate a correction made by another dog. Now, your dog is not going to think that you're a dog biting their neck, but it is an aversive sensation that they understand that does not hurt, and that's incredibly important. If you correct your dog with this specific prong collar in the way that we instruct, you will not be hurting your dog, and you will not have any negative consequences behind your correction. So as you can see on this collar, there are no buckles on here. This collar is incredibly secure, and if it's fit properly, it cannot fit over their neck, so there's no way that they can break this or break out of it. So other than it being an incredibly effective and non-painful way to correct your dog, it is extremely secure. Your dog cannot break out of this if it's properly fit. Now, because there are no buckles on here, you have to take the collar apart by taking it apart by the links. So all of the links will come apart anywhere on the collar, whether it's this side or this side. It's not difficult to do, but it does take some practice. So I would recommend practicing when your dog is in the crate and they're sleeping, they don't have the prong collar on, so that you are very good at putting this on and off, especially if you have a wiggly dog. So what most people do is with your dominant hand, that's the hand that you're going to use to pull the prong apart. So you can either hold it by the base and just pull the prong collar apart. You can also hold the prongs by the top and squeeze slightly, to get it off, and it will come off either way. You want to make sure that you are not putting real physical strength into pinching the prong collar. This is very malleable and flexible stainless steel. It does not take a lot of physical strength. It just takes practice. So if you find yourself squeezing really hard to the point where you're shaking, stop, because you will bend it out of shape eventually. Now to put it back on, it's a little bit easier. You're going to hold the prong by the top. And again, this is flexible, bendable stainless steel. You'll put one prong into one hole and you will squeeze it just enough so that you can get the prong in. Again, to take it off, you pull it apart. You can hold it by the top, squeeze just enough so you get the prong in. And again, that can be done anywhere on this collar. What you don't want to do is take the prongs out of this middle plate, not because you'll break it, simply because it'll be very difficult to get the prongs back in those tiny little holes. But any other prong can be undone. So when putting the prong collar on your dog, you want to make sure that it is not twisted. So if it's twisted, it will look like this. It won't work properly. And you'll notice that when you go to put it on your dog, it's too tight. So you want to make sure that it's not twisted. Everything is nice and even. The leash is connected to the D ring, not the round ring, the D ring on the bottom. Put it on and over your dog, pinch the links, and you're good to go. To take it off, pull the prongs apart, take it off your dog. The proper prong collar and e-collar placement is that you want the prong collar above the e-collar. So your e-collar, you want the transmitter on the side of their neck, either side, it doesn't really matter. And a good trick is that if your prong collar is a little loose, the e-collar that's nice and snug will help to hold everything up, because you want the prong collar up high on their neck. You don't want it way down low because it won't work as well. So e-collar underneath the prong collar. Now, another important tool when correcting your dog with a prong collar, other than the prong collar itself, is your drag leash. In addition to the prong collar, your dog will be going home with a drag leash. And a drag leash simply means it's a leash without any sort of loop or handle on the end, so that your dog can drag it around the home and that loop will not get stuck on a furniture leg or on their leg or something. So this is a leather leash. We recommend using a nylon leash, which is what your dog will be going home with. And the drag leash will be connected to the prong collar. So as you can see on the prong collar, there are two different rings. You'll be putting the drag leash or any leash on the D ring. So this ring down here swivels so that it does not get caught or tangled. If you were to put it on the O-ring up here, you'll see that the prong collar gets tangled and it will not work properly. So you want to ensure that your drag leash is on the D ring so that everything is nice and even and nothing is twisted. And that leash can again swivel around without being tangled. Now, the drag leash should be used on your dog inside your home and outside of your home when they come home from a board and train. Your dog was always on leash here, especially in the beginning of their board and train, because the leash allows you to have a direct connection to communicate with your dog and complete control over them. So your dog cannot run off and jump on your guest or run off and attack another dog or chase a cat if they have a leash on. It gives you complete control over them. It also provides direction. So in the beginning, when your dog is not used to being corrected by you or not used to being corrected in your home, the leash allows you to physically guide them to where they need to go and where they need to be to eliminate any sort of confusion. So the drag leash should be worn inside of your house when your dog comes home from the board and train, and when they are outside, they should also have a leash on, especially if they are being walked. One last note about the drag leash is that this should never be on in the crate, and that goes for the drag leash and or the prong collar. When your dog goes into the crate, you should take the prong collar off and remove it from your dog. There's no reason for this to be on in the crate. It can be extremely dangerous because it can get caught. There's also no reason for your dog to have a leash on in the crate. They're just going to chew through it, and again, it can be very dangerous. If your dog is playing with another dog, it is incredibly important that you take off the prong collar, especially if the other dog is wearing a prong collar, because again, they can get tangled, or the other dog can grab your dog's drag leash and now start correcting them and dragging them around, which can be very problematic and very dangerous. So you should always remove the prong collar and drag leash when your dog is in the crate or when they're playing with another dog. Now, for the sake of this video and teaching you how to correct them for getting off, I'm going to try to make it a little bit harder and try to encourage him to get off without permission so I can show you how to correct them. Good boy. Good. As you can see, even though I'm applying some leash pressure, he's stuck on this bed until he hears his release word. This is a dog that clearly understands this command. Good. So I didn't give him his release word. Let's pretend that I didn't encourage him to get off. Let's say that your dog just decided they're done with the place command. I don't want to do this anymore, and they got off the bed. The first thing you would do is you would say no, remind them what they're supposed to do, place, and pop the leash. Good. You're going to pop the leash all the way towards the bed until they get back on. And when they get on, you're going to say good. Free. Good boy. Place. Good. Let's see one more time if I can trick him to get off. No. Place. Good. It is extremely important that you pop the leash until your dog is entirely on the bed. Do not just guide them back. Do not pull them back. If you find that your dog is not understanding the command, meaning they're getting off the place bed over and over and over again, it's because they're not getting corrected for it. The only way that you can correct them for this is if you pop the leash, pop, 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 until they're entirely on the bed. Or if you have your e-collar, you can click with the e-collar, click, 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 until they get on the bed. But it's incredibly important that you correct them for getting off without permission. For the sake of the video, let's pretend that he got off on his own. Let's pretend that your dog is home with you and they just decided, I'm done with the place command, I want to get off and go hang out with you. The first thing you would do is say no immediately. So immediately when your dog gets off the bed, say no, repeat place. Good, and pop the leash until he gets back on. As you can see, Oscar runs back to the bed because he knows that the faster I get there, the faster I can stop popping the leash. Free. Good. Place. See if I can get him to come off the bed again. No. Place. Good. And I'm just giving him little pops with the leash. These do not need to be incredibly hard. I'm not yanking on him. I'm just popping the leash towards the bed until he gets completely on the bed. What you do not want to do is just guide them back without popping the leash. You do not want to pull him back to the bed. You need to make sure that you are saying no immediately and popping the leash with the prong collar the entire time until your dog gets entirely back on the bed. You can also use the e-collar. So if you are across the room and your dog is e-collar trained, if they get off the bed, same thing. You say no, place, click, 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 click with that e-collar remote until they're entirely back on the bed. If you're gonna walk away from your dog, remind them, place, and you can put your hand out because this tells any dog that you don't want them to approach. So before you walk away, remind your dog, place, and then you can leave them there.
So the typical philosophy behind corrections that's generally used with most dog trainers, and I do agree with this, is that the correction should match the behavior, right? The punishment should fit the crime. The problem is it is usually applied differently. So it's usually applied that the singular correction should completely stop the behavior. And what we are often taught is that one correction should be enough, right? You should only have to correct the dog once and they should just knock it off. And while that's an adorable theory, it's the same thing as expecting a child to never do something again because you told them one time, right? And that's just not the way it works. That's not the way learning happens in any animal. Repetition matters, whether it's to reinforce something good or to punish something bad, right? So the general approach with corrections usually start on leash, right? Now, the general approach is that to deliver that correction to the dog, the trainer, handler, owner is giving a quick pop on the leash. I am not demonstrating how hard. For right now, for this example and explanation, intensity is irrelevant. I'm just showing that it's nice and loose, and it's nice and loose, right? A quick pop is not the same as a pull. So if you pull the leash, this is not a correction. But the general approach and the general tactic to correcting a dog is usually to just give the dog a good solid pop on the leash right off the bat, right? So let's say you give him a 3 out of 10. I know there's no numerical value attached to a leash correction, but just hypothetically, you give them a 3 out of 10, right? So the dog jumps up on the table, trying to take your food, no pop, right? Well, if the dog doesn't stop, then obviously it wasn't a good enough correction. It wasn't a high or hard enough correction. So the dog's barking out the window at the mailman and you give them a 4 out of 10 and they keep barking. Obviously a 4 wasn't enough, and it is pretty difficult to argue with that logic. So what you are generally taught is when the dog does something wrong, say no, give a good correction. If the dog keeps going, say no again, and give a harder or higher correction, Now, this is, generally speaking, the overall guiding approach to corrections worldwide. Of course, there are exceptions. Of course, there are trainers who don't do that. But the overwhelming majority of trainers do approach corrections with this philosophy and with this tactic, which also means that over time, escalation is inevitable. You will have to escalate the intensity of your correction over time. It's going to happen. That's just the way it works. Because normally they get off the couch when you give a 3 out of 10, but this time they didn't. They were a little riled up, so it took a 4. All right, well, next time just give them a 4 because a 4 worked this time, so next time just start off at a 4. All right? And then a couple months go by and you're at a 7. And a couple months go by and you're yanking so hard, your poor dog's getting ripped off the couch. And eventually, that's not enough either. Well, one, you don't want to be yanking at all. You're not supposed to be yanking your dog around. That's ridiculous. That's crazy, and it's going to do serious damage to the relationship you have with your dog because you will eventually be hurting your dog. And you shouldn't need to hurt an animal in order to discipline them. You don't have to hurt a child in order to discipline them, and you shouldn't be hurting your dog. But with that approach, escalation is inevitable because that approach is also known as systematic desensitization to physical stimulation. This is how fighters are trained to take a hit. So if you are just slowly, incrementally building up that physical stimulation, you're slowly building up your dog's tolerance to your corrections. So eventually, whatever training tool and collar you were using to give those corrections, they're used to that, they're immune to it, they're numb to it, so you get something else. And now that works really well because it kind of packs a harder punch, which you shouldn't be doing anyway, until eventually they're so used to that, you get a stronger collar, you get a higher model, you get a new... That's crazy. And that's not the way we do things. That is not the way that we correct dogs. So our approach to corrections is very different. So just a quick reminder, when thinking about corrections, positive punishment is when you are adding a consequence to decrease or eliminate a behavior. Negative reinforcement is when you are removing something unwanted as a reward, right? So the normal approach to corrections is only using positive punishment, right? You give that one pop on the leash, which is positive punishment. You're adding this unwanted, pop on the leash. Doesn't need to hurt. It's not supposed to hurt. It's still positive punishment. And if that doesn't work, step it up and escalate. So our approach is very different from this. So let's say a kid goes to the grocery store with his mom and he wants cookies and she says no. Well, the dog trainer said that when your dog disobeys or does something you don't like, you're supposed to say no and then pop the leash attached to this highly technologically advanced training collar specifically designed to efficiently deliver an effective and humane punishment to the animal, right? But that little kid doesn't have that on his mom, and she did disobey his command, so he needs some other form of correcting her, right? He said fetch, and she said no. She disobeyed. So because he doesn't have any training tools at all, he just uses what he has on him, which is this. So he has nothing. He has no advanced tools. He has no technology. So instead of saying no and popping a leash or clicking a button, he says Mom as his marker and pokes her, right? Technically, this is the perfect application of that approach, philosophy, method, everything, right? He has a verbal marker and he has a corrective tool. That poke doesn't hurt at all, but it's still positive punishment. She doesn't like it. It's kind of annoying. So in the very beginning, everyone who loves their dog has a big, very common issue when it comes to corrections where they simply don't correct the dog high enough. You're not hurting your dog and you're not supposed to hurt your dog, but because we're so afraid to hurt our dog, most people start off with a really, really low correction, almost like tickling them, so it doesn't stop the problem at all, right? So they start with like a 1 out of 10. It's a joke to the dog. They blow it off. You obviously got to go to a 2, right? So the first time this little kid decides to correct his mom, he just, it's not no pop. He just goes, Mom, barely pokes her in the back of the leg, just kind of lightly touches her, So he has a verbal marker, he has positive punishment. And because it's a 1 out of 10, she barely heard it, she barely felt it, so she completely blew it off and ignores him. Obviously, he has to escalate because that wasn't good enough. That didn't stop the problem, right? If you fly through a stop sign and all the cop does is make an angry face at you, you're not going to stop the next time. If you get a ticket, you'll start to stop at that stop sign, right? You have to escalate if the punishment isn't working. So he gives her a 2. Mom pokes her in the back of the leg a little bit harder. She blows it off. Mom gives a 3 out of 10, ignores him, 4 out of 10, ignores him, 5 out of 10, ignores. Well, one very obvious problem with this philosophy and this approach is that this is extremely time consuming and slow. So by the time this kid's at a 5 out of 10, they're not even in the same aisle anymore. This is taking a really long time. And considering how short your dog's short-term memory is, if you do this when they jump on the couch and you just slowly take your, no, pop, didn't work, no, pop, didn't work, and you're just slowly building it up one little increment at a time, by the time you get to whatever that magic number is, they probably have no idea what's wrong with you, why you're upset, and why you're correcting or punishing them in the first place, which is extremely problematic because now they don't know that you're correcting them for getting on the couch. They just think you're lashing out at them and you're kind of crazy because this is a ridiculously slow approach. So if this kid's at a 5, and he realizes how slow this is, something clicks, right? Maybe the magic number is a 7, and he can just slowly keep working his way up. But if a 7 works, an 8 will work. If a 7 works, a 10 works. Overcorrecting is still a correction. If a tap on the shoulder will work and stop the problem, then a punch is definitely going to stop the problem. So because this approach is going so slowly, let's say he just escalates and goes all the way to a 10. Let's just knock all the nonsense off and get right to the point and stop the problem. He doesn't want to give a heavy-handed correction, just like you don't want to give a heavy-handed correction to your dog. But if it's going to just instantly be that quick fix and stop the problem, maybe that's the best solution. So that kid just goes right to a 10, screams as loud as he can, pokes her in the back of the leg as hard as he can, jams his finger in the process, pokes her so hard, applies so much positive punishment, he hurts himself in the process. But that's as hard as he could do it, right? And she just stops, cringes, and keeps going. So he gave the hardest, highest level of correction his corrective tool and device was capable of giving, and it failed. So this is the equivalent of you turning that e-collar all the way to 100 and the dog keeps barking anyway. You pulling that leash as hard as you can, and they still won't get off the couch. What do you do? What do you do when this approach has systematically desensitized your dog all the way to the highest correction, which they now ignore as well? So obviously what's wrong here is the training tool. In comparison to these highly technologically advanced training collars that we use, this is a pretty weak and pathetic corrective device. So I think most logical, rational people would just point at that, and that's the problem. He's poking with his finger. That's not a very good correction. Of course it is. Which is why eventually every little kid or dog who doesn't get their way, whose corrections are not working, whose uses and application of positive punishment is not getting their way or stopping the problem, will almost always resort to the exact same tactic that every single human being absolutely utilized since they were little babies. And that kid dials his positive punishment all the way back down to a 1 or a 2, nice and soft. No way is he hurting his mom by poking this softly. He still uses the same tool. He doesn't escalate and get a pencil or a fork or anything like that. He just pokes with his finger still. But instead, he goes, Mom, 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 Mom. There is no way any mother in the world is going to take that and ignore it forever. Now, this example is a real example that I actually watched and witnessed and took note of, and it changed my training forever because every single kid uses this approach. Every single dog uses this approach because it works almost every time. But as that kid is poking and poking And poking, he could just say mom once and just sit there and keep poking and poking and poking. But every poke is positive punishment. And every poke, every bit of positive punishment is incrementally building her up to her point of tolerance. Everybody has their limit. Everybody has their breaking or reaction point. And when he finally pokes long enough, she's going to react. And she's either going to reinforce his behavior or she's going to punish his behavior. But in the example I saw, he did this for about 8 seconds. She lost it and she went right back to the aisle, ripped open a box of cookies and gave him cookies right on the spot. So what did he do? He instantly stopped. So she positively reinforced all of his negative behaviors, making him more likely to use that approach next time they go to the grocery store. And he rewarded her with negative reinforcement by stopping. Negative reinforcement is the removal of something unwanted as a reward, right? So when he's going, mom, 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 I'll stop. I will stop annoying you when you give me some of those chocolate chip cookies. And that's exactly what he did. So him just shutting up is a reward. So the normal approach to corrections, where you just incrementally build up nice and slowly and super inefficiently, guarantees that you slowly desensitize your dog to the corrections until they completely blow it off, right? It's guaranteed escalation of the intensity of your corrections. Our approach actually guarantees escalation of the dog's response. It guarantees escalation of the dog's performance. So that dog will actually get off of the couch faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. They will drop the flip-flop they just grabbed off the floor faster and faster and faster. So we use our approach because it not only allows you to use a much lower level, painless, harmless, humane physical correction that can't possibly hurt your dog, but it's also dramatically more effective, and it gets even more effective the more you use it. Because I guarantee if it took 8 seconds for her to give in and give him some cookies the first time, it probably only took 5 or 6 the second time, which means it probably only took 2 or 3 the third time. And the fourth time when they walked in, he didn't even need to ask, because he has conditioned her to respond faster and faster, because the faster you give in, the faster I reward you by stopping all this unwanted negative behavior. But your dog does this every day. Paw, 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 paw. So you reach out and pet them, positively reinforcing their negative behavior, and they stop pawing at you, negatively reinforcing your obedience. Bark, 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 bark. You let them outside, so they shut up. They're using negative reinforcement and positive punishment together in the same approach all the time. We didn't reinvent the wheel by using this approach. We just copied it off of dogs and children. And this is the one example where fighting fire with fire is super effective. So this is exactly what you're going to do with your dog. You're not going to use heavy-handed corrections. You should never be yelling ever at your dog. Yelling creates fear and apprehension. So unless your dog is super far away or you are in a loud environment, you should not be raising your voice. Just give a calm, firm no to mark the unwanted behavior. And with that leash, pop, 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 until the dog stops. Now, obviously, you need to give a good enough correction for the dog to care. You can't be like gently massaging them or something. And the leash is directional, so they jump on the counter or the couch, you can pop them off of it, but don't stop until they stop, right? Your dog picks up your sock. No, drop it. And as soon as they let go, good, and you stop. So regarding the timing of your markers for corrections, you need to say no at the exact moment your dog did whatever they did wrong. Whatever you are correcting them for, you need to say that word no right when they did it. Because whatever they're doing when you say no, that's what you're correcting them for. And it might sound obvious, it might sound redundant, but what we see every day is the dog jumps on the couch, the person pulls them off the couch. Not supposed to be pulling anyway. It's supposed to be a pop. But they get them off the couch and then say no. So the dog thinks they're not supposed to get off the couch. You need to say no when they get on the couch. Even if you can't correct them instantly, say no instantly. When the dog jumps up on you, no, then you grab the leash and correct them.